We are back. The Gashouse Gang has two members today. We get to pair up throughout the week. It is election day, and my vote went to Kevin Wheeler.
Oh, yeah.
My old buddy. I marked you down. I wrote you in, Kevin Wheeler. It's great to see you as always. Wheels
It's the
and I
only
go
vote
back.
I'm ever going to get.
How far back do we go, dude? 06? Although I was listening to you on Sporting News Radio
Yeah.
before that.
Well, personally, August 2006, so 18 years.
Wow.
Let's put it this way. I don't think you had a kid yet when I first met you.
No.
And now your kids are getting grown.
Erica was born August of 06.
Yeah. So right when Ian Gould was born.
Yeah.
Or right after that.
She was born, and this is how long you and I have known each other. She was born when you came into KMOX, and she voted today.
Oh my!
How about that?
Yeah. So what you're saying is we're old.
We're old. We're seasoned veterans, Kevin,
Yeah.
and we know this team. That's why people tune into the Gashouse Gang, because they know that between me, you, Matt Pauly, who's been around the game for a long time, he was the Brewers pre and post before he came to us, worked in the Royals organization and others. And then you got, of course, Bernie Miklasz, who's been covering the Cardinals for a long, long time. So you're in good hands. And today you got Wheels and I talking ball. Kevin, let's get right into this. So, we kind of pick up where we left off yesterday. The GM meetings are underway, and I'm just curious the calls John Mozeliak is going to get. One of the things that he said, and Derek Gould wrote about this today, is it is a two-way street when it comes to these players. And what I mean by those players are Sonny Gray, Nolan Arenado, and Wilson Contreras. He's going to chat with all three and try to figure out where they are, because it's clear that the Cardinals are in movement here. Is it a youth movement? Is it a full-on tank job? No. It is a reset in the front office and in the roster. So let me get your thoughts on that, starting with those three players.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you're in a position, I think, again, I don't know their finances as well as, they know them. I do know, what they're losing on the TV side right now, or what's at risk, I should say, right? I mean, the TV deal that they currently have is at risk and is probably not going to exist in its same form. And by not existing in the same form, that means it's going to be lower, right? I mean, I think that's the expectation, at least for the short term. Down the road, who knows? But for now, that's kind of the expectation. What we don't know is what exact number they think they have to get to, I don't know, balance the spreadsheet, right? So is what they've already done, letting $50-60 million worth of players just walk away from last year, is that enough? Or is there more that needs to be done? But as you point out, those players that we're talking about, Contreras, Arenado, and Sonny Gray, they all have some control in this because they have no trade clauses. So you're only going to be able to send them to a place they're willing to approve. And at the same time as that, if you can't find a good match, the two-way street thing that we're referring to with team, Cardinals, and players, these three guys, that needs to be the case with your trade partner too. It's got to be a two-way street. I don't think that those three guys should be in any way, shape, or form part of just salary dump trades. If you're going to do a salary dump trade with Steven Matz or Miles Michaelis, okay, fine. You don't need to get much in return. Just somebody takes the money and you move on, or some of the money and you move on. Those other three players, though, are too good for that. So if I'm, and it's probably the toughest guy to trade is Nolan, because he makes the biggest amount of money, and because his offense has been down the last 2 years. It's not like he's Nolan Arenado from 3 or 4 years ago. So, it's a fine balance that you have to strike this offseason between reducing the payroll in a smart way, but also not giving away quality assets, because those three guys have value. I think that the highest value might be Sonny Gray, because every contender needs another starting pitcher, right? We just saw in the playoffs, how many of these teams were out of starters after 2 games in the series? How many bullpen games did we see in these playoffs? I think that, and I know some of it's injuries and it's not the way it was planned, but the point is almost any contender can use Sonny Gray because it's only 2 years and it's a fair amount of money, but for the way he's pitched, it's fine. I think Wilson Contreras has tremendous value. I mean, that's a middle of the order bat that can catch and he's only locked up, I think, what, Tom? He's like 3 more years, and it's pretty reasonable. I mean, it's like 17, $18 million, which in today's market is pretty fair for a player, that hits like he hits. So I would think the demand would be high for all three, but especially for Contreras and Gray, assuming they want out, because that's a big part of this. If they don't want out, well, they're staying.
Yeah, and you know what? As you mentioned, all three of them have value to the Cardinals. Arenado,
Right,
it goes
right.
without saying, guy's going to go into Cooperstown. He's still a billboard guy. Sonny Gray will be the ace of your staff, and Wilson Contreras was your best hitter. I mean, if he doesn't get hurt, can they probably make the playoffs? I mean, because
they're closer.
he
If they don't get in, they're a lot closer.
Yeah, I mean, he elevates Goldie and Arenado in that lineup. If he's in the middle of the lineup, the way he was hitting, it's a real bummer. That said, what place does he have if, well, he always has a place, but
yeah.
If you have Herrera, if you're set on kind of grooming Herrera or Pages or Crooks or Bernal, I mean, you've got a lot of guys waiting in the wings in this catcher pipeline. That's A. B, I'd like you to answer. Let's start with Contreras. Who would be the best trading partner? Or for that matter, all three. Which teams? I would prefer these guys go to the American League, by the way. But which teams do you see as active trading partners potentially?
Right. So, there's probably not a ton, and for each guy, it's a little different. So if you look at Nolan, obviously you got to have somebody that wants a third baseman, and somebody that can eat at least the majority of that deal. So you're obviously talking contenders. I think the Yankees would make some sense depending on what happens. And here's the problem with Nolan. So I want to put this out there as we start the conversation, Tom, because some of this is going to depend on other guys. If the Yankees are going to spend on Juan Soto, they're probably not going to add Nolan Arenado too, because they need to add some pitching to go along with whatever else they do. So this is all just, not knowing how some of the bigger name free agents are going to go, and just looking at where somebody could need. And I think the Yankees could absolutely use a third baseman. They were playing Jazz Chisholm there at the end of this past season because Gleyber Torres wouldn't move off of second base. Well, Jazz is probably going to move back to second base. So that leaves guys like DJ LeMahieu, who's been in decline. They also have an opening at first base, so they could use LeMahieu there. I think that's an option. Boston would be an option if they decide to move Rafael Devers off a third. And that's something that Craig Breslow in Boston has already talked about. Not that they're going to do it, but that if they're going to talk about moving him off a third, they'll have the conversation with him before they have it publicly. But doesn't that kind of tell you they're thinking about it? Because Devers is not a great defender, and they're going to try to find ways to make their team better across the board. Toronto's an interesting team, right? I mean, Toronto tried to get Shohei Ohtani. They're supposedly going to be a team that's bidding on Juan Soto. They're probably not going to get him, but they have an opening at third base as well. And they're trying to get better because they want to keep Vlad Guerrero Jr. I don't know if they want to keep Bo Bichette or not. We'll see how that plays. But they have an opening at third base, and they're trying to get better, and they have money. So, if you're looking at, the American League East is loaded with teams, 3 teams there that would make a lot of sense. The only team in the American League Central that would make sense, Tom, would be Detroit. I don't think Nolan's a perfect fit there. They do need a third baseman because Matt Vierling, St. Louis kid, can move around. He's played a lot of third, but he can play third, left, right, center field, play some first also. So they're comfortable with him playing multiple positions. They need a right-handed bat for the middle of the order. The question is whether or not they'll look at Nolan's production from the last 2 years and think that fits what they're looking for. But, look, what if Houston loses Alex Bregman? Do they want a short-term answer there so that they don't have to pay for 8 years to go replace him? And they put in a guy like Nolan, who, by the way, pulls the ball a lot, short left field porch, great defender to go along with all of that. I mean, Houston's a great fit. If they lose Bregman,
I told you in the office, I think Goldie's going to go to Houston.
He could, yeah. Maybe it's a package deal.
Yeah, I think Goldie goes to Houston. It's his hometown. They have a need for first base. They like to sign veterans to go in their mix, and he's got that short porch. I mean, he could yank those into the Crawford boxes and maybe rejuvenate his career one last time.
Both of those guys would be well suited there after being at Busch, which is tough on right-handed power guys.
Totally. Yeah. I let me go back to Contreras for a minute. He was really a great player, and not that he's leaving or anything, but boy, I just feel bad about it. I think he really wanted to come in and make an impression, and the Cardinals lose in back-to-back years that he's here. Well, they technically didn't have a losing record, but they don't go to the postseason in back-to-back years. It's really a shame. Maybe he can come back, but I think that it would be fun to watch him on a contender. I think he'd be good, and the Cardinals would get good return for him, good return for Gray, and I think good return from Arenado.
Yeah, I think the return is probably least on Nolan just because of age, offensive production, and contract, right?
Yeah,
So when you look
number.
at when you look at the combination of things, age, contract, production, Sonny's older, but Sonny is also a front of the rotation starter who's performing, right? So there's a sliding scale. They can live with age if performance is there. And obviously, with Contreras, you probably have the best of all three, right? He's the youngest of those three guys, plays a valuable position. He's not a great defender, but you don't have to catch him full time. You can catch him part time and play him at DH or first base or whatever. But that bat is a middle of the order bat for less than $20 million a year. And, right-handed power bats, you list teams that could use a right-handed power bat that can catch. And not just, even if you don't want him to be a primary, I've tried to sell you on this for my Tigers. Like Contreras is a perfect fit. They have a starting catcher who's a Gold Glove caliber guy in Jake Rogers, but they still play their backup 2 or 3 times a week. So if you're going to have a guy catch 2 or 3 times a week and then DH on top of that, you might get 150 games out of Contreras, and you're getting power, you're getting hard contact all the time, and you're not spending 8 years and $30 million a year to get it. It's 3 years at 17. And I bet if you run down the list of teams that could be interested in a guy like Contreras, it would be twice as long as what we talked about with Nolan.
Yeah.
And keeping in mind, by the way, that these guys all have to approve their destination. So we can say who might like them, but we don't know where they would be willing to go. And, we saw that with Nolan when he was traded to the Cardinals. The Rockies might have gotten a better deal from the Dodgers, or maybe wouldn't have had to eat the money that they ate from the Dodgers, but they weren't going to trade him in the division. And that limited the number of options, and therefore the Cardinals wound up kind of being in a fortunate place where they could take advantage.
Man, remember how happy Arenado was when they won the division in 22 and he got to taste champagne for the first time, and how much that clubhouse it's amazing how much time changes things. I went friggin' ballistic in 23 when his name came up in those Dodger rumors. I'm like, absolutely not. Shut this down right now. And now here we are talking about who Arenado could be traded to. It's unbelievable.
It is. Yeah. But you know what? This is something that we haven't seen from the Cardinals, right? We really have not seen them in this position. I know we talked about that last week, but we go back 18 years, Tom. This kind of offseason hasn't happened in those 18 years. We haven't had that kind of, okay, we're going to take a reset. It's always been framed differently. So I guess in that way, you're kind of fortunate, but it does lead to this weird, uncertainty about what the team's going to look like. I'd love to tell you, they could still win 82 games, or who knows? I have no idea who's going to be where. And one change, as we talked about yesterday with the four of us, with Matt and Bernie, both with the two of us, who moves determines who plays where. If Nolan is here, that means that Gorman is not sliding over, right? But if Nolan is traded, maybe Gorman slides over, maybe Donovan slides over, but it changes the composition of this. And that's why this is so fascinating, because we really don't have a clear idea of what this is going to look like.
Well, there's another name that you just tossed out there. So Ryan Helsley obviously is one that we've all talked about, that if you're going to trade at his top value, this is the time, and that of course they'd be lining up to have a closer of Helsley's caliber, and he's eligible for arbitration, and eventually he's going to make some big coin. But you just threw one out there. You could make the argument that the best hitter on this team last year was Brendan Donovan. He ended up with the highest batting average. He led them in a number of categories. The guy gets on base, takes great at bats. Could they trade Brendan Donovan? Do you see a scenario where he does not have a place in their future and they could trade him?
And to be clear, and I'm going to look right at the camera and say this, I'm not starting a rumor.
No, we're just talking.
I'm not starting a rumor. I'm just talking in theory, right? In theory, if you're trying to take this offseason and put the franchise in the best place possible for 2026 and beyond, I think you have to be open to conversations on guys like Brendan Donovan. And you have to be open to conversation on a guy like Lars Nootbaar, right? Those guys have 3 years of team control left, maybe 2 for Lars, but they're right around the same amount of team control left. They're good players, but you don't know exactly whether or not they're going to be here in 3 years, but they also can get you something. So like using Donovan, the reason I bring Brendan Donovan up, I think he's phenomenal. I don't want to trade him, but you might get something really good for him because every team in baseball that wants to contend next year can afford him. Every team can use him because he can play right field, left field, third base, second base, first base, and an emergency play shortstop. He gets on base, which is a valuable skill for every team. Nobody's going to be upset about that. He can hit for average. He's got a little pop. Like he's a super well-rounded player for a contending team. And they're all of those, by the way, are reasons why you want to keep him. But JJ Weatherholt's going to be here fast. He's not going to be here in 3 years. He's going to be here in a year, maybe. Maybe the end of 25, early 26, maybe. It may be faster than that.
He's a second baseman.
Yes, and he's probably going to be a second baseman. I mean, I guess you could make the argument that he's athletic enough to play short. He could play left field or he could play third base. Fine. But those are all the positions.
We got one of those. Yeah.
Right.
Shortstop's pretty good here. Yeah.
And then, but those are also like second, third, left. Those are all the positions that Donovan contributes in. So my point is not dump Brendan Donovan. My point is you should listen. And if you can get 2 or 3 really good players for him, yeah, okay, this coming. But and then the other part of this I didn't get to yet, Tom, but I think we mentioned it in the office right there where you're sitting. We mentioned that you also have to find out what Thomas Ajaysi is. And you can't make him a platoon guy because then you're never going to know. You're never going to know if the guy's an everyday player or not. So where does he play every day if you keep Donovan? If you keep Donovan and Nootbaar and Gorman and Walker, and they're not trading Gorman or Walker because you'd be trading low, where does Ajaysi play on a regular everyday basis? He's not a shortstop, and nobody else is playing shortstop but Mason Wynn. Mason's got it on lockdown for at least the next 5 years.
But where does Ajaysi play if he starts?
I mean, they're second base or left field probably. You know, if Nolan Arenado's not here, you could try him at third, but most of the evaluations that I saw about his defense indicated his best spot's probably second base or left field, but he hasn't played in the outfield, not for real. So you'd have to start that project in spring. But look, Tommy Edman didn't play outfield before the Cardinals put him in the outfield.
He's Edman Jr., yeah.
Brendan Donovan didn't play the outfield until the Cardinals put him in the outfield. So like guys that can play in the middle infield can play left field. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't mean they'd be great at it, but if you can play second base and shortstop, you can play left field. And that's not to diminish left field, but that's the spot where you typically have a weak arm or less speed, or you just happen to have great defenders in center and right, and you got another good one in left. I mean, that happens, but it's not typical. So that's why when I'm looking at this offseason, why not listen on Brendan Donovan? Maybe even shop. Why not shop him? Why not shop Lars Nootbaar? I like Lars. He's a good player. He's very talented. And, you know, the problem with him is the injury proneness might diminish what you could get in return. But nothing should be off the table in that regard, because if I can get high-quality arms, or I can get somebody who's 22 that might be an everyday outfielder or might be a third baseman 3 years down the road, whatever I can get, I know what I have coming already. I know JJ Weatherholt's going to be here. That guy is not going to take long, and there's a reason he was a top 10 pick. I mean, if he hadn't hurt his hamstring, he might have been the number 1 pick in the draft.
Yeah.
So you have, and my accounting for building for the long term, I'm assuming that, and I have a glut of guys there. I've got for that grouping of positions. I've got Nolan Gorman in that group. I've got Brendan Donovan in that group. I've got Thomas Ajaysi in that group. I'm going to have JJ Weatherholt in that group. And then I have to count, you know, where does Burleson fit at first? Do any of those guys play first? If I can get a great offer for one of those guys, I'm going to have to listen to it.
Yeah. So you're not, just so people understand, we're not talking about selling off this entire team. Like
no.
Like they're not going to trade all these guys.
No. I'm like, yeah, exactly right. So we're talking about. Hit my microphone.
You're dropping mics.
We're talking about all of the possibilities, not all of the eventualities, right? So, because I don't think they're going to gut the team. You're right, Tom. That's a good way to put it. They might trade 1, 2, 3 of the players we're talking about, but they're not going to trade 8. They're not going to do it. I think that by moving one, you're answering multiple questions, right? Like using the Arenado scenario. Bernie had a great video on the Bernie Show on YouTube talking about why the Cardinals should trade Nolan Arenado. Well, if they do that, that clears a spot for some of these guys we're talking about. That gives maybe the opportunity for Gorman to slide over to his natural position, which leaves second base to Brendan Donovan for the time being, and he's your best defender there and a good hitter. That creates maybe the super utility spot for Thomas Saggese. So like one guy going out does help solve a bunch of those questions. It's just a question of who it's going to be. And a guy like Donovan doesn't have a no trade clause. There's no limit to the places that you can send him, and he doesn't have a big salary. So that's why I'm saying if it comes down to, what's the best thing for the future of the team? Is the best thing for the future trading off Nolan Arenado and getting some salary relief? Maybe, because then you can spend that money in a year or two if it's not committed to him. But it might also be that if the offers for him aren't great, or if the places he wants to go aren't offering you anything, you could turn around and trade someone like Donovan, who doesn't have a say, who has plenty of value because he doesn't make a lot of money, and answer some of those same questions, right? Create some of the same opportunity that we're talking about. But the preference would be to move out older players, right? Yes. That's the preference, but we're just talking about all the possibilities.
I think you're right. I would prefer not to trade Donovan. I think that he's still young, and he's still, even though he seems like a veteran, I mean, he just became a regular a couple years ago. I think that there's
and maybe you give him a deal. Maybe you give him a 5-year deal.
Yeah,
I wouldn't want to break the bank.
No,
I wouldn't want to do that. But maybe you say, hey, man, we like you. Let's buy out your first free agent year or two, and we'll build a deal that looks like. This was brought up to me on a podcast I was on over the weekend for Viva Alberto's. Jake brought it up, and it was an interesting point that maybe you do something that's similar to what the first contract was for Matt Carpenter. Not the second extension, but the first one that they did made a lot of sense, and it worked out pretty well.
Yeah. Donovan just seems like such a winning player that you can not build around necessarily, but have part of this movement moving forward. And, he serves the role that Zobrist did with the Cubs, that Edman did with the Dodgers. He's a do-everything winning type player who gets on base, makes things happen. You look at the rest of this team, and we've gone through the positions. Do you see – I'll throw this to you because I threw it to you guys yesterday, but do you see a scenario where the Cardinals, if they, let's say, strike a TV deal, and it's not going to be as big as it was last year, if they feel like they have enough money to pay enough players and not reduce payroll drastically and still redevelop the player development system and still feel like they have a youth movement coming, can they compete in this NL Central? I mean, are one of these teams going to run away in the division? Can you still be competitive in 2025?
I mean, you can. It's not necessarily likely, but if you ask to draw up a scenario, it's not hard. So again, some of it depends on how you structure the rotation, right? But if you keep both Eric Betty and Sonny Gray, and they pitch like they did last year, something similar, a little better, a little worse, something similar. Same thing for Andre Palante. If you get that, and then you find a way to be better at the back end of the rotation than you were with Lynn, than you were with Matz when he pitched, or than you were. I mean, look, Kyle Gibson had a good solid year. His first half was better than his second half. But if you can replicate that even closely, then your rotation can be similar to last year with upside guys maybe joining the team at some point. Guys like Quinn Matthews, guys like Tink Hentz, who's going to have to be added to the 40-man this offseason. So there may be some upside in that regard, like in the second half of the season with stuff guys. The bullpen's the hard part to figure. I think Bernie made a great point yesterday that if you trade Helsley, boy, you're really going to have to be on point and maybe even go out and get somebody in free agency to help with that group, right?
Yeah, because it stands right now, who's the backup closer? It would have been Kittredge.
Right.
But Kittredge is a free agent. Someone's going to grab him.
Right. I mean, I'm fine with as in theory, Romero and Fernandez being your guys, but after that, then what? Right. I mean, you have to those guys fit in there, right? Like amongst a group of 4. Well, you have to have the other 2. So if you change the order, if you say, okay, Helsley's gone, we got a great package for him. then maybe you do bring back Kittredge, or maybe you do go out and look at another guy who can join that mix, and one of them closes at some point. But we'll throw Liberatore into that group. But basically, last year you had 4 or 5, probably 5 guys that when you had a lead going into the 6th, 7th inning, you were in pretty good shape when you had those guys lined up. So if you go into this year with only 3 and you're sorting that out, it could be bumpy. So I think that was a great point Bernie made. But look, relievers are not expensive.
They're not.
You can, if you can,
and Chaim Bloom's one of the best at finding them.
Right. And if you can get a really good deal for Helsley and turn around and then spend half the money, 70% of the money on a quality guy that can come in there and join Romero. Like, I don't know who the guy would be, but like, just as an example, Maton just had his option declined, or he declined his option, I think it was. Add that guy as a right-handed reliever to replace Kittredge. All right, you've taken one step closer to being where you were. Like, I think there are relatively easy ways to bolster the pen. You're not going to go out and replace Ryan Helsley with that guy. The hope is that either Romero or Fernandez can be the closer, and then you can fill in from there. And by the way, you don't have to have that question answered for 162 on opening day.
Yeah.
Right. You have to have that. You have to be good enough to get to July and say, man, do we need to go get somebody? Do we need to go get somebody to help that out? And if you do, great. If you're in that position, that's fine. But I do think that's an interesting point, that if you're going to move Helsley, you do have that concern. And we saw how that blew up in 2023. And I don't think anybody wants to see that again.
Yeah. I really like Liberatore, when he's throwing gas, and he's really matured into this, potential killer coming out of the bullpen. It's really nice. I just think the Cardinals have to have some semblance of entertainment value. I mean, they cannot go out there and lose 100 games. I mean, the fans
they're not going to
get on board with that. They got to be you can't fake that you're in the hunt, that you're a World Series contender here or something, but they got to have some entertainment value. And perhaps, if you're growing the kids and you're playing with some winners, you're teaching them how to win, but you're also giving them pathways to succeed. And I know it's not going to be the easiest thing for fans to catch on to right away, but man, oh man, I mean, if Mason Wynn, Jordan Walker, and some of these others, Nolan Gorman, let's say he starts to turn the corner a little bit, Brant Brown unlocks something there, and the guy starts to swat home runs left and right, that's kind of fun. I mean, let's say the Dodgers roll into town and the kids beat them in a series. That's pretty cool. And who knows what could happen from there. I mean, this is not the same situation, is it, that Detroit was in, where they were like, kind of selling and looking to build for the future, and then suddenly they find themselves in the playoffs and they're starting to steamroll. I mean, I thought Detroit was going to make a serious run.
Why can't that teach you something? Why can't that teach you something? Why can't you look at it and say, if you're really creative and really smart, sometimes you can do more with less. Now, you can't do that for 6 months, in my opinion, and that should never be the game plan to do that. But man, look at how creative they got. Look, so not only did they trade Jack Flaherty at the July deadline, right? And by the way, got a guy who might be a top 100 prospect coming up this winter, who's destroying the Arizona Fall League, a switch hitting, power hitting catcher, who may or may not stay there, but that's the main guy they got for Jack Flaherty. Well, they also got the guy who was starting at shortstop for them in the postseason in Trey Sweeney. So, that was a very helpful thing, but they had 1.5 starters for 2 months, and they made a great run and made the postseason. They had 1.5 starters. They were bullpen games every day, and they were using guys that were like AAA depth guys as the bulk innings guys, but they would only face the top of the order one time. So the opener would get the top of the order. The middle of the pack kind of AAA roster filler guy comes in and he pitches 3 or 4 innings, but he's only going to face the top guys one time. And then they start to piece together from there. You don't want to do that, but in theory, I would like to see the Cardinals be creative and aggressive when things aren't going right.
No more Band-Aids. I mean, this whole thing of like trying to get whatever's left out of so-and-so, those days got to be over.
Yeah. And also being smart. Like, how many times, Tom, did you and I talk about it? I know Matt and I talked about it. I've heard Bernie talk about it a million times. How many times did we talk last year about not being able to match up against left-handed pitching? because you had no options. You wouldn't you boxed yourself into a corner by committing to 2 old left-handed hitting infielders. I get it. I liked Brandon Crawford addition at the time that you brought him in because you didn't have another shortstop and you weren't really sure what Mason Wynn was going to be because he didn't hit when he was up in 23, right? The end of 23, he didn't hit. So you had to have some kind of like, okay, somebody that can play shortstop. But you got to a point during the season where having nothing but lefty bats on the bench and lefty bats in the lineup, you hindered yourself against left-handed pitching. Meanwhile, you had a Luken Baker crushing at Memphis and destroying lefties, like 1,100 OPS against lefties, which is what he's always done. I want them to be more aggressive on those kind of things.
Yeah,
I
like
want
it
them to be
doesn't
like, hey,
translate.
it's June, we're not hitting lefties. We got this guy down here who's been killing lefties. We don't need Brandon Crawford anymore because Mason Wynn's an all-star. Or, look, we love Matt Carpenter. He's a great influence and a great guy, but he plays once a week. Are we getting enough value from that to avoid bringing up that right-handed bat that not only can help us against left-handed starters, but can be the bomber late in games against lefty relievers? And in the short time we saw Luken Baker, how many times did that happen? We only saw him a little bit, but we had at least 3 or 4 moments.
It's just a little bit like minor league success doesn't automatically translate into big league success, but you got to give guys opportunities. You got to give guys at bats. You got to let them see big league pitching. No doubt about it. I like the Burleson Baker idea at first base, by the way.
Yeah, why not?
That's where I would go. I would not put Walker there. No.
Listen,
gosh, no.
I know we talked about it yesterday, but Matt made a great point. Don't change anything else for him right now. Just let him concentrate on hitting. Let him stay in right field, concentrate on hitting, work on his defense in spring training with Willie McGee and the guys and Jim Edmonds, and then in season with John Jay. Let him get the reps that he should have gotten. You know, that was the thing that's, I think, a valid criticism is the fact that he ever even played third base in the minor leagues was ridiculous because they'd gotten Nolan Arenado already. And you had Nolan Gorman already. You had 2 guys that were going to play third base before he would ever see a minute there. Should have started the conversion right away. He's an outfielder, and most people thought that. First base, down the road could be doable, but you know what? It's also a waste of his physical abilities. He's an above-average runner for a big guy. Not even for a big guy. He's an above-average runner and a big guy, and he's got a 70 arm. He throws 95 miles an hour when he's on a mound. He did that in high school. Like, this is a guy that the tools say he should be a right fielder. So work with him to make him that. Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I mean, you got to give these guys the opportunity to fail and let them go out there and work it and try to figure it out. He's got to be able, Jordan Walker has got to be able to see every ballpark, the trajectory of how the ball flies there, how the crack of the bat sounds. And that's, all those things, the dimensions, the ability to, what is it like when you slump at the plate? Can you still overcome and create value by being a good defensive player, and vice versa? If you make an error in right field, can you overcome that and be a good hitter at the plate? And there's a lot to process as a young ball player. And Jordan Walker is so young. He's so young. He's got to be able to do it at this level. Kevin, I'm just so happy that we're able to do this and talk ball. We're not done yet, by the way, but I love talking ball because baseball in this town is the sport that you can talk about 365 days a year. There will always be interest everywhere we go. People will ask us about this. So this gives us the opportunity. I want to pause just for a moment and ask you to subscribe to the YouTube channel, KMOX Sports. You can subscribe to KMOX 1120 also if you'd like. Both of them are going to pick up this show. But the KMOX Sports one, we just kind of rejuvenated it. You're going to see there's not a ton of subscribers at the moment. Get in there because it's going to fly. And once this thing starts getting going, I think that YouTube channel, KMOX Sports, is what you're going to want on your phone or your device. And while you're at it, subscribe to Bernie Micklus's too, because it's going to be really a lot of fun. This has been a great idea to do. It also gives you and I an opportunity to talk about something else. So Saturdays for me right here and now, they always have been college football days for me. I just, it is my one day of the week where I don't work most of the time. I can get up in the morning and throughout the day, I'll do things. I'll make things happen around the home. I'll run errands. but college football is it, baby. And I am so fired up as a fan of Indiana. I know you are as Miami, but there are a lot of people in our audience that are fans of teams that are in the hunt. I mean, half the top 25 is going to be taken to go to the college football playoff, and the other half, except for a few that have already suffered 3 losses that are at the bottom of the top 25 right now, everyone kind of thinks they still have a shot. That's what makes today at 6:00 so fascinating when this first CFP ranking comes out.
And it's the best argument for expansion. You know, the old school powers that be would push their message behind the scenes to other people in our line of work and be like, if you expand the playoffs, you're devaluing these regular season
Oh,
games.
yeah.
No, you're not. You know what you're doing? You're multiplying the number of games that matter. So you might argue that 20 years ago, Michigan and Ohio State playing each other was basically a playoff game in real time. Fine. But we now have 5 or 6 of those for every one that used to exist because there are more spots. There's more opportunity. And look, I've seen every contending team this year, Tom. There is not a team out there that is a lock to be in the championship game. Not one. Every one of these teams can get beaten every single week. And that's because of the transfer portal. That's because of the NIL stuff, because talent's being spread around more, which is why you hear I'm sorry. I'm going to go on a short 10-second rant. This is why you see all these wimpy college football coaches whining. This is why Dabo Sweeney's always crying. It's why all these guys are like, this is bad for the game. No, it's just harder for you. So suck it up. You tell your players to suck it up and get through difficulties and handle hardship. You do it.
Like Mike Gundy?
Yeah, like Mike Gundy. On the basketball side, you probably will disagree with me on this, but I got after, what's his name? For the Virginia coach that just retired. I got after Tony Bennett because this guy's message to his players has always been, don't take the easy way out. Don't transfer to another place where your playing time will come easy. Stay here, stick it out. Sometimes it's hard. Well, the minute the game gets hard for him, he's out. He's done. I made my money. I don't want to deal with this anymore. Fun messaging there. Really, really nice. Tell your guys one thing, and then you apply a different standard to yourself.
Well, it is a different world today. And if you grew up in the old school, look, I think Travis Ford would fall into that category. I don't know that he was complaining necessarily, but Travis, who I love, has been a coach for like 28 years, like as long as I've been at KMOX. He's been a basketball coach. And so he was on the whole, he was trained to be. I mean, there's a few guys that can convert like Tom Izzo has and others, but, Travis Ford was trained to go to kids' homes and recruit the heck out of these kids and sell them on being a 4-year player and playing for UMass and Oklahoma State and SLU and all of this. It's not easy to do today. I'm a fan of Indiana. Obviously, I'm an alum. Mike Woodson has struggled with a little bit. Now he's hit the portal hard and he's got the thing rolling. So it is difficult. I get it, but I hear you. It's the complaining and
it's the double message.
Yeah.
It's the preaching to your players that you stick it out, you adapt, you do the difficult things, you do the stuff that's hard because it'll make you better. And then the minute it's too hard for you, like, bye. Sorry. Hey, by the way, it's 2 days before the season. Bye. You're on your own. Have fun.
No, I got you. I get it. And now you look at this college football playoff ranking that's coming out today, and I think you're right. It is wide open. I mean, Oregon does look like the best team in the country right now. I mean, they've done a very nice job. They went into Michigan, never an easy place to play, and they handled them pretty well. Georgia's shaky, but Georgia's fine. I mean, I said this the other day, Georgia beating Florida by a couple of touchdowns, and it was not it was a lot closer, but they play well even when things don't go well for them. They find a way to close the game out and win. Even the Alabama loss, they came back from 28-0 and damn near won the game. Ohio State looks great. They got the job done at Penn State. Your Hurricanes, while they give up points, they score points at will, and I think they have the best player in the country. This is the AP top 5 that I'm reading off. Yeah. Texas at 5 is a legit contender as well. Texas, they lost a game, but we all know who that was to, and it was to Georgia, and they are going to be just fine. I think they're loaded with talent. Those top 5 to me are a clear top 5. The second 5 I have questions about. Penn State's schedule, will they be able to – they needed to beat Ohio State to be considered a real contender. Tennessee lost at Arkansas, and they looked a little shaky. No more slow starts for them. Indiana, I mean, come on, it's been unbelievable. They're 9-0. They've crushed everybody. They've not played a ranked team yet. Everyone's waiting for the Ohio State game. I say, hold on a second. They still have to beat Michigan at home. Yeah. BYU, great, but BYU is going to raise questions until they go to the Big 12 championship game. And then Notre Dame, as good as Notre Dame is, they did lose to Northern Illinois. So there's your top 10. How do you think it shakes out here today?
So I think that all of those will be in the college football playoff. You've got great. I really think the depth here is good. That's kind of my biggest takeaway is I think there probably are like 18 teams that are quality to be in the top 12. And of course, the rest of the schedule will sort out who those teams are. So I really like the depth in college football this year. I don't think there's a program like what Georgia was a couple years ago or like Alabama was forever, where it's like, okay, Alabama's going to win. Ugh. And I'm glad that we don't have that. But I'll tell you the thing that you're looking at, Tom, to me, for the playoffs, not who gets there, but who can advance there, I'll be watching entirely the teams with the quarterbacks. I think that's going to be the difference maker. So Dylan Gabriel at Oregon is that guy. I think Carson Beck is that guy. Cam Ward is that guy. Quinn Ewers is that guy. I don't know if Will Howard is. I'm not sold yet. I'm not saying he's not. I'm saying I'm not sold yet because the rest of Ohio State's pretty amazing.
He had a better Saturday than Beck did, although both won.
Yeah,
you know,
no,
Beck's got. I got it over a little too much.
I've got some questions about Beck. Yeah, he's coming into the year considered a first round draft pick. I don't know that he's playing that way, but I don't trust Drew Aller at Penn State. Iamaleava is really good. He's very talented at Tennessee, but super erratic and inconsistent. I don't think that's a guy I can count on. I mean beyond Texas, Oregon, Georgia, Miami, Ohio State, beyond those guys. Is there a quarterback that I should look at for a team that can go all the way? Like a guy that is the money guy? Because look, as a Miami guy, our team's the same team it's been in the last few years. The only difference is Cam Ward's amazing because we still commit too many penalties on defense. Miami still doesn't stop anybody, can't cover anybody. They can rush the passer, but they never have time to because nobody's covered. So all anybody has to do is just get the ball out, and they don't have to worry about being sacked. But they can score. They got a great quarterback. They've got 2 NFL running backs. They're loaded at wide receiver and tight end. They're going to score. But defense, I'm not sure is championship caliber, but they got the one guy that can change it in the quarterback in Cam Ward. And I think that Gabriel is that. Quinn Ewers can be that. Certainly Beck has been that in the past. And we'll see about some of these others. Is there another guy in your book that fits that category that we should be looking at?
Yeah, I mean, this is a homer call, but Curtis Rourke at Indiana, who's had a tremendous year. He's had a tremendous year. I mean, he has been the reason that they have been destroying people is that Curtis Rourke has been a darn near perfect quarterback. He's got great receivers to throw to. He has a line that has been protecting him. He's got a good running game, but he's been extremely accurate. They took him out of one game because of injury. He could not play in the Washington game. They put Taven Jackson in. Taven was a little shaky, and they ran the ball 50 times and basically bullied Washington into a victory. And then Rourke came out with a glove on his hand and fired touchdown passes all over the place in the last game against Michigan State. The reason why nobody really knows if he's the guy yet is he hasn't had a marquee game yet. He hasn't had a major national TV, everybody's watching game. That's how you get into the Heisman discussion, but also the can you take a team to a championship discussion. And he's going to get those the next 2 weeks, next 2 games. Michigan on CBS this Saturday. That's a marquee game with big announcers and big stakes. And then, of course, 2 weeks from then, the Ohio State game, which also will be on national TV if IU takes care of business against Michigan. And that will be the game where everybody is watching Curtis Rourke. If they somehow upset Ohio State, even if he has a good game against Ohio State, but if they upset Ohio State, he will be in the Heisman discussion. That's the kind of thing that can propel you when you play big brands like that. So I think the only reason he's not being talked about is that A, it's Indiana, and B, they really haven't beaten a great team yet.
Yeah. So my worry about your guys and my guys is that neither of us have played anybody. I mean, and I would, I mean, I'll make the exact same argument for Miami as I would for Indiana. There's not a real quality win on either schedule. Washington is not what they were a year ago. They're a 500 team. And if I look at what my Canes have done, what's our best win? Louisville. And then don't get me wrong, Louisville's pretty good. They just went and handed Clemson their butt at Clemson, but I think Clemson stinks. And by the way, they don't stink across the board, but they stink at quarterback, which is kind of getting to the point of what we're talking about. But like I look at, the win against Florida is nothing. They've been mediocre at best all season long. Florida State stinks. Duke, Cal, Virginia Tech, South Florida, they're all just meh. So my worry about both our teams is that they haven't been tested yet, and that means I don't know what they are.
Yeah, I think I'm going to throw a couple of things at you before we go. There's some really sneaky good games coming up this Saturday. I mean, we all know about Alabama, LSU. And by the way, if Jalen Milroe carves up LSU and Bama is now sitting there at 7-2, people will start talking about them again as being a playoff team and potentially damaging one. I think the other game that could be really interesting is BYU at Utah. Utah's lost 4 in a row. They will be ready for BYU. That game is not in Provo. That game is in Salt Lake City, and it will be very interesting to see what comes out of that. But the next week, dude, I mean, there are some really, really fun matchups that are going to be lined up, like Oregon at Wisconsin. Oregon should handle it, but it'll be a challenge for them. Tennessee at Georgia is really fun. So, I mean, each week throws you these fun opportunities and ways to shuffle it all. And there will be arguments, even with 12 teams, there will be arguments in the end. But I'm looking forward to the 6 o'clock. If anything, it's another distraction on election night.
No kidding. I would rather have to argue about 13, 14, and 15 getting left out than 3, 4, and 5.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's a better argument. It's like, okay, fine, guys. Like, look, we get you, but we got 12. I mean, it's a good patch. By the way, this week, Tom, one other guy that could be in this conversation, not totally sold on the team, but Jackson Dart at Ole Miss might be that quarterback also. And they play Georgia this week, which is probably an elimination game for Ole Miss.
It's a great game.
If they lose, oh my God. And it's a home game for Ole Miss. So they're between the hedges. If they lose, they're done because that's their 3rd loss. If they win, they might jump ahead of Georgia and they might jump to the top of the SEC.
And I think they just exploded. They looked amazing, but might have peaked against Arkansas, 63 points. That ain't happening this week. I mean, Kirby Smart, that is basically like a loss to them, barely beating Florida and kind of looking sloppy. He was not happy after the game. I think they are extremely focused and they go in there. It'll be a great party. Ole Miss will win the tailgate because the
playoff game, though. It really is.
It is. But I do think Georgia goes in there and handles them. I might be wrong, but I think
there's something about Ole Miss team I don't like. And it might just be as simple as I'm not a big fan of their coach. I am not a Kiffin guy.
I like him. I do like Dart.
He's a fun quote. Come on, but what has Lane Kiffin ever won?
I like his quarterback too, but you're right. No, Kiffin, he's fun. I like his kind of, laid back attitude sometimes. I like his fun sort of approach to the game and all that. No, he's not.
Jackson Dart's a lot of fun.
He is. I like him a lot. He's got wheels. He's got a nice arm. I love how I like the trajectory of his throws. He throws those big, deep, long passes.
It's spinning.
Yeah, he's a good one. But I think Georgia handles them and kind of knocks them out of it. We're going to see some knockouts.
Yep.
It's going to be fun. We'll kind of, as the season rolls along here, you and I will get a chance. I'll make sure we get paired up every so often so we can talk some college football.
Compare notes. Now, I mean, and to be clear, everybody that's watching us, during the course of the week, we're going to be hitting everything. We'll hit NFL when it's big. Yeah. We're going to hit the Blues when things are really going. I mean, right now it's kind of a it's a must. It's really a mess start for the Blues. And then you've got Thomas and Broberg down. There's just not a lot of excitement. Let's be honest. It's just not the way right now. It's not, but I'm hoping it will be there later. But we'll do a lot of college football, but on Mondays are Cardinals Mondays. Mondays, we're going to hit baseball hard every week.
We're going all baseball with the 4 of us. So tomorrow I'll be with Matt Pauly, and who knows what we get into. He likes hoops, so we may dip into. You guys may do
a little week 1 college basketball.
We might do that, but we will have a lot of baseball talk for sure. By the way, I can see all of the comments that have come in off YouTube and Facebook, and I know that people are watching on X, etc. So we really appreciate that. And
You know what
our
we need to do,
producer,
Tom?
that was our producer Wilson right there.
Yeah, we probably got to go in a second, but we really need to. We should set up a Gmail account for the Gashouse Gang. That way, people can send us things they might want us to talk about.
Oh, I like that.
What do you think?
Yeah, let's do it.
Set that up for next week.
Gashousegang@gmail.com. You want to set
try
that
and
up?
see it. If it's not, we'll just put a number on it if we have to.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right.
For Kevin Wheeler, who's on the DGS, and today you're going to do what do you got?
In 10 minutes.
Get over there.
Go from this
he's here in
coverage.
He's here in the same building as me, as we sit here at KMOX. I've got to go vote, so I'm going to go do that.
Get her done. I did that this morning. 13 minutes in and out.
Talk to you in the morning. Total Information AM. Kevin's on the show here in about 10 minutes. Thank you for joining us, the Gashouse Gang, right here on your favorite social media channel.